Hey, Teen Summers, good to have you back. We are here with one of our favorite subjects, which is better
Financial
finance,
intelligence.
yeah, financial intelligence around the family. Eric, Kali, thank you for being here. Kelly, thank you for being here. So I've been working on our son dates a girl named Callie
For
for years.
years.
Oh,
So
that's tricky. That's not fair. That's
Untrained.
it was a positive name. Believe me, it wasn't a bad thing to call you
And
that.
when I went to correct your name from Callie to Kaylee, I then still spelt it Callie, but with a K. I'm like, oh, I can't untrain. She's been around for years. So
So you're basically part of the family already.
there you
Welcome.
go.
we love her. So.
So tell us, how did you guys get into this?
Get into the business itself of wealth management, or
How'd
like,
you get into guiding families towards better decisions on finances? Might be a
Yeah,
better.
that's the better question.
yeah, I mean, I feel like I jumped into it right after school as far as getting into investments. And then once I realized that I was in a more corporate environment for 6 years at various big banks, I thought, you know what, I need to be directly in front of people so I can make a bigger impact. So in 2007, I jumped into the financial planning world. 2013, I launched the business to really focus in on helping those families that we help. And then Kaylee has a bit of a different iteration of how she got into it, but we obviously joined forces later on, 2018. But how did
I think the motivation was the same because Eric, when you started your business, you wanted to help people that weren't being served by financial advisors. When you think of a financial advisor who has one, it's often older people who are already retired and already rich. So what do
Mm.
they need more advice for, right? There wasn't anyone serving people in their 20s, 30s, even 40s when Eric started the business. So it was a really underserved market. And those are the people that need the advice the most because they're the ones making the decisions that are going to set them up longer term. So when you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, that's when you need to be asking for financial advice. That's when you need the guidance. That's when you need kind of that outside perspective to figure out, what do I do here? Because not only do you have a lot of decisions, you have a lot of choices. So the more decisions that you can get right early on, the more choices the optionality starts to build. So that was part of my motivation too. I always worked with advisors kind of on the internal and operations side. But I wanted to join Eric's business because he was helping people that were more like me, people that weren't born with money, people that had to figure it out and kind of be self-made. And so that was really
Yeah.
motivating to me to help more people who had so much potential and they just needed some guidance on which of these, 50 paths do I go down to really maximize that potential.
That's awesome. I know that for Gemini, I mean, we're 40 and 50, or I mean, barely. He just turned 50. I don't want to offend anybody on this podcast.
No offense,
But
I'm owning it.
um, and there's a lot of things that we've just started learning, years down the road that maybe could have saved us if we started so much sooner. I just think that like we were even just like the amount that we were paying in taxes. And then when we got the right person working with us and guiding us and like masterminding, not just this year, but the next 5 years, and what are your goals? It's been like hugely life-changing, the amount of good we've been able to do with our money and the amount of money we've been able to keep in our pocket. So it's been really, really helpful. I love that you guys help people with important decisions on money, like before the next chapter. So, for example, I think you talk about like before you have children, here are some things that you need to do. Like, how do you help in those transition times? Because I know it's super important to be mindful of what your money's doing while you're busy doing other things.
well, it's a bittersweet opportunity because the sweet part is that you get to just play all these different scenarios out without the stress of living any of them, just to see
True.
how it
Right.
happens. The bitter part of it is that, as most people, especially someone like me, I don't really learn until I get into it. So you can know a lot, but then it's only when you jump into it that you start to retain it all. So there's that give and take, because we always say you really need to test the waters. Like, spend money on things, understand if you like that thing before you commit fully to it, and then pull back if you don't. So
Mm.
it's try something, pull back, think about it, then do the next thing.
Is there a common mistake you guys see that younger couples are making that you
Mm.
come across all the time? You're like, ah, I'm so glad we have this directional advice to, but is there any like common one that comes up that you see a lot of people face?
And the two popped into my head. I'm sure you can guess one, but the first one is especially people who are younger, things are going really well, they make good money, and they're like, well, we have time, we can save later. Kind of, you're like, we don't need to save so much, we'll figure it out later. And to some extent, that's true. Like, you do have a lot of time. You have plenty of room to kind of explore, figure out what you want. And I never want to quash that idea in someone. But on the flip side, when you're talking about investments and building your assets, you kind of don't have time. Like, you have to start. The best time to start was yesterday. So really, you need to be saving now, because the power of compound interest only works if you
Yep.
give it the time to work. And if you commit to letting it run, like, don't interrupt it once you get it going. So it's just challenging, because when you're younger, yes, you want to, as Eric said, try things out, experience things. That's a great thing to do, but you've got to strike the balance between knowing that time is your biggest ally when it comes to growing wealth. So you have to get some of that money that you have available into some kind of investment, into a good diversified portfolio, so that it can be growing for you. So I think that's probably the biggest mistake that I see people make. And it's tricky, because I can argue both sides of it. But at the end of the day, I think you've got to err on saving more than you think you have to, especially when things are good. Because that's like the last thing that you're thinking of is like, all right, when's the other shoe going to drop, you know?
Yeah.
But even, you don't have to be pessimistic about it, right? It's just, if you look at the lifespan, your whole lifespan, it's unreasonable to think things are always going to go your way 100% of the time. And
Yep.
therefore, you got to, build that safety net for yourself. You've got to kind of start now of, all right, I have the means, I have the ability, let me save more than I think I have to. So when the day comes when you can't save quite as much as even you want to, you're all right. You already did kind of that saving. You started that process of compounding in motion. I think
Yeah.
I think you can jump on.
Anything else to add to that?
But
Eric?
the other one is, especially around major metro areas like Boston, New York, LA, buying too much house right off the bat, right? I mean, you guys are into real estate, I think I saw, right?
Yeah.
But when it's your primary residence and you just try to just go all out for that, and then you don't have other money to invest in other properties that are investments or the market or other things, or they go on these trips that you really want to explore, you've set the bar so high for your fixed expenses that it shrinks the buffer room and flexibility.
Absolutely.
Room and
Absolutely.
flexibility.
Yeah.
I like
I
that.
thought that might be one of the ones, especially where you guys are. It can be an affluent area, and you can do well. And what I've learned, because we've worked with some people on this, that house loses its luster when you have to say no to all opportunities, no to experiences with your families. That too much house, that one thing can change someone's whole financial direction. Because I like to own real estate, but if you're only able to invest in that one thing, man, that can be very limiting and dangerous.
Yeah.
And that brings up a thing for me too, because Jim and I just had to decide. We have this like great piece of property that when we originally purchased it, we were going to develop it, and it was going to be, we had a whole entire vision of it. And then the pandemic happened, and everything took 3 times as long and took 3 times as much. And we, our vision had to change over the course of time. And now, we ended up purchasing a home in Costa Rica during the pandemic, just because it was somewhere nice to go while the states were shut down. And like our values changed, our perspective changed, our long-term changed. And now we realized, if we want to continue to develop this land, one, it's going to take, again, more money while it's making no money. And then also it takes us away from where we really want to be. And so this brings me to the next question. You guys have a great question that you ask your clients, is what does wealth really mean? Right. And that's like, what does it mean to you? And how do your clients define that? Right. Is that something that you guys work toward helping people really hone in on?
It is, because it's different for everybody. But unless you start to really think hard and ask the tough questions, you're not going to realize what it is for you. It's just going to be money. And if more money is your goal, you're never going to have enough.
Yeah.
So we were just experiencing it this weekend. We were talking about it. We were out in town in Boston, and we had just taken the day on Saturday. It was a beautiful day to walk around the city with our 2.5-year-old daughter. We stopped at various restaurants and got some bakery items, and then we got a drink in the city, and just we're able to just really let go and enjoy ourselves. and not really worry about how much money we were spending, because it wasn't a cheap day. And if I can do that kind of thing and money can fuel that, or at least allow for that to happen, I'm wealthy, right? I'm not wealthy that I can't just stop working tomorrow and just live off of my assets yet. But there's some wealth in that ability to choose and be free to live.
Yeah.
That's a big shift for us, because we were talking, because this weekend was Memorial Day weekend, and it's in the past, people would, we would be working on a Thursday or Friday coming up to a long weekend, and people would sign off their emails like, oh, enjoy the holiday weekend. And we'd be like, what holiday week? What? Oh, right. Because we would be working the whole holiday weekend, because that's what the business demanded. So I think some of that, the wealth is not just your money, it's your control over your time, it's your autonomy, it's how you feel when you're getting to choose your time. Do you really feel free to choose what you'd like to do, or are you kind of constrained by whatever it may be, either your work life or your family dynamic, because your relationships need work, all those things. You can invest in all those things. You can invest in your yourself, your relationships, your family. And that's what you guys talk about all the time. Like the family board meeting book that really struck a chord with me. And I had read it before I'd had my daughter. I was pregnant. But so even before she was here, I'm like, yes, that's that one-on-one time, that really quality, like I am going to be solely focused on you. Like that's wealth too, to have the ability to take those days, to take that time one-on-one with each member of your family. That's huge.
Yeah. These are all important little things. It's funny how these things, they're big things, but really in the scope of things, they are more little things. To be able to walk around with peace of mind and grab an extra snack without thinking of how much it costs, or an extra coffee drink.
Or if one of the children like spills it and you're not like, oh my gosh, that drink was $7.
You're like, we'll get another one. And that's key. I know one of my real estate mentors said, yeah, I want to be able to walk into a restaurant and get sushi and not worry about if I order the most expensive roll on the menu, because it's the roll I want. And so it's a very simple thing. But again, I think this is where people get wrapped up, like you said, in extravagant. And extravagant's not always what you end up looking for. Like, I'm sure you guys have even seen people that have done well and they've kind of overloaded themselves into this extravagant lifestyle.
Like the things.
And the regret is just so thick you could cut it with a knife.
Yeah. And that's the challenge with things, that the extravagant things, when you make it part of your day-to-day, no matter what it is, part of your day-to-day, good or bad, it's your day-to-day. It becomes normal to you. So you need more and more to feel like you're in luxury or extravagance. So when that's like your baseline, it's just a recipe for unhappiness, because there's only so much that you can add in, right? Or you're just constantly chasing more, or what you think is better or shinier, and there might not be something. If you surround yourself by so much good stuff, like in a way it sounds nice, but when you're around it every day, you just kind of start getting numb to it because you're so used to it.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely.
Now, how do you suggest navigating so you navigate 2 high power careers and parenting, right? And being a family. And I know that you speak on how to navigate and how to make those decisions and prioritizing family. What are some rhythms that you have in place, or some things that you suggest those working parents can do to prioritize their family?
I think one thing that comes to mind, and this isn't, I think maybe we lucked out here, but we have different skill sets. Right. What Kali is good at is not what I am good at, and vice versa. I'm more of the ideas visionary type person, and she's very much the checklist. Let's get everything in order and structured and get things done. And so when we combine those two things, whether it's in the business or it's in our personal life, it really works well.
And so I think playing to your strengths, whatever they are, and you're right, I think we have an advantage because our strengths are so different. It creates like a 360-degree view, but not everybody has that. So I don't think there's any prescriptive advice, like any one thing that someone can do. It's more about looking at the dynamics of your individual careers, the family that you want, and just sitting down and communicating and iterating. I think it's more than just communicating openly and honestly. It's doing it over and over and over again, because you're going to try something It may or may not work. You've got to come back together and look at, all right, what worked about this, what didn't work. And it's not about right or wrong or who has it harder or whose time is more valuable. It's just, did this work for our family or not? And you have to be able to, kind of talk about that. It's a skill to learn to communicate in a neutral way so that you're not making anybody right or wrong. But I mean, that's what we do. And I feel like we've gotten into a good rhythm now, but it probably took our daughters a little bit over 2.5, and it probably took at least like 2 years and 2 months to start feeling like, all right, now we've got this figured out. And I mean, it was hard. So I think just that being willing to go through an iterative process where being willing to try things, like throwing stuff out there and be like, all right, let's see how this goes. I think that's a good way to go. And again, there's no one right way to do it. I think there's a million different things. So I feel bad that I'm not giving a specific example or specific like, hey, try this, but I don't know if there is any one thing. What works for your family is not going to work for mine, and vice versa.
Yeah, I think playing to your strengths is important when you're two, high power, have two, careers in the home. I know for us, really and truly playing to our strengths is helpful. And sometimes, like you said, it has to come from a place of neutrality, because otherwise someone might get offended. Like, oh, why am I always the one doing X, Y, and Z? And I end up in that because we are very different people. We can both mastermind at a high level, but I'm in kind of like you, Kaylee, in the details and the doing part, whereas Jim is in more of like the envisioning part. And I used to, even recently, I have moments where I have to communicate, like, I feel like you don't want to do this because you're not involved in the executing of doing this. And he's like, oh my gosh, no, if I tell you, hey, we should go away, I 100% mean it. I might forget to put it on my calendar. I'm not going to book it. I'm not going to, but if I tell you, then I absolutely want to. And when I show up, I'm going to have bells on, and so it's like, it was hard for me as a spouse to think like, are you sure? And so, but like you said, time goes and I realize, wow, he really does show up whenever his role is ready to be played, or, just playing to those strengths. And that's just one example that I can think of that doesn't have anything to do with money, but careers and balancing, I
Well,
think.
it does, but it's, it has some, but
I mean, planning, yeah, I guess, but
I think what's been helpful for us too is like marriage is not 50-50. Like your role in family is not 50-50. Nothing is ever perfectly equal. You should be looking for equitable. And what that looks like for everyone is going to be different depending on what your strengths are and what your interests are. And respecting too that there's always going to be something that the other person does that you don't fully see. So like taxes are an example for you. Like Eric takes care of all of our business and personal tax stuff, and I don't see it because he just does it. So it's like I have to do extra work to kind of acknowledge that and recognize that. And also on the flip side, there are things I do that he has no idea of. And I can see where it's like, all right, he can't acknowledge or appreciate that because he doesn't even see it. He doesn't even know that it happens. So recognizing that that's kind of in a good partnership, I think that's going on. Of
absolutely.
Some of your work is going to be unseen, and so is the other person's.
Let me ask you guys this. This is something that we found ourselves very different than some other entrepreneurial couples and mastermind groups we were in, or family events that we hosted. We're of the idea, even though I'm mainly in the real estate investment company force, and that like we meet with our accountant CFO every Thursday morning, and Jamie's in those meetings because it always there always seemed there could be either a husband or a wife, one of the spouses who knows everything about the money, and the other one is completely blind. They wouldn't know what bank they were at, what checkbook, like they would have no clue where they're invested. Do you guys see that? And what do you guys encourage? Do you encourage both people in the couple to be involved?
I think you have some red flags for couples managing money.
Oh, is that
together.
one of your red flags? Because for us, we always say, holy moly,
I was like, whoa,
that's pretty scary. We always said, well, let's make sure we both understand.
We've had different parts in our life where like Jim, knew more, or maybe it was really stressful in the business. So I was carrying more of the money management, and it kind of went back and forth, but it's been amazing to have us both
knowing where things are,
transparency of everything.
Yeah. I don't know, is that a red flag for you guys? If you start taking on a couple of months, like, oh yeah, I don't really need to know where it is.
It is. It just feels like a weak spot in the advisor-client relationship, because we don't have full participation from everybody. And full participation doesn't mean that you have to know everything that the other person knows, because like we said before, one person might be better at something like numbers or is more engaged in investments. The other person's like, I don't need the details. But if they're not in the conversation, at this point, I don't bring on people as clients unless they're both involved. If someone says, I'm going to be the person in the meetings and the other person's not going to be there, it's too much of a hole in the relationship, and the translation from what I say and we talk about to the next spouse, it just falls flat like a game of telephone.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. And do you ever try to persuade them, or you just say, I'm not even going to try to move the needle on this? It's just too far apart.
There's been times where I've tried, I want to help, so I just want to bring everybody together, but I can't force that. If someone's not committed, they're not committed, and it's turned out poorly when I've tried. So I don't push too hard. I just, in the beginning, first couple of conversations before we're actually engaged in the client advisor relationship, I'm testing the waters, seeing who shows up, seeing who is speaking, and then making decisions based on that.
I think we do try, because some people kind of express that like, hey, we're not on the same page, or like we need help trying to work through this together. And that's totally different. I think it's just,
Yes.
it needs to be that first intrinsic motivation of I want to figure it out. Like it's not that you have to come in, fully formed, all good, totally on the same page, perfectly in sync. It's just that the willingness to try has to be there.
To show up.
That's the key word, I think, willingness. If they're like, well, I don't know, but we're willing to figure this out. We want to figure this out. If they're like, no, I have no interest. I shouldn't know where the money is. I don't
Definitely
care.
tension sometimes between you and I, as far as like, okay, where are we going to move this, or how is this going to look? But it's always creative.
We call it creative tension. We make better decisions when we're both kind of, well, that's good, but what about this? Well, but how about this? And if you're just on your own, that's not quite the same effect. And then we've worked with couples on where then all of a sudden it's on one person, and person makes a decision. They go, well, why'd you do that? And that can be a little hard to come back from, because they were kind of put in that position. So yeah, you guys definitely have a very big role there of trying to get people to see the importance of that synergy, because it seems like you guys have a great synergy for, even though, like you said, you have different skills, for coming together on these bigger decisions and knowing the direction you're moving in.
Yeah, I really look forward to the conversations we have, even when we're not on the same page or don't know the answers yet, which is most of the time we don't know the answers yet.
Yeah.
How we're communicating, because I know that in the right environment, those conversations really thrive. It's just, it's almost, it's an enjoyment to just hang out over lunch and just talk about things in an expansive way.
Sure. Absolutely.
And those tough conversations are important. How do you have tough conversations and make those hard choices,
Good question.
Around trade-offs, whether it's the career and family balance, maybe Kali, you want to be home more, and so then Eric needs to step in more in a different way. Like, how do you have these difficult conversations and decide what trade-offs are, whether they're financially or time commitment wise?
I think it goes kind of back to the iterative, like having iterations of the conversations. Like we'll throw something out there and kind of just like, all right, here's where I'm starting. And we'll come back to that same conversation. Like I was much worse about this in the beginning of our relationship. I think I've gotten better now, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I used to not be able to let anything go. Like it had to be resolved in that conversation. I was not going to stop talking until we had like a solid answer. And that's just not with, I mean, you can probably get away with that with little things, but not big things. Like that's got to be more of a process, more thinking through it. And you mentioned like creative tension. I think we have like productive friction. That's the term that we use. Like there are these like points where we disagree, and we have to be okay with disagreeing and walking away and picking it up later, because then we're able to each think about it more individually. We're able to get inputs from different places and come back and have not a totally new conversation, but a continuation of the conversation. I think an example of that is actually kind of the opposite, Jamie, of what you said. We were speaking recently about like, should I be working more? Because I really cut back my hours when Talia was born. And we've been talking about that, kind of going through like, all right, well, what would this look like? What would we do it in this direction? And I think we've settled on all we have right now is pretty good, because we've kind of explored like trying to play out those scenarios and realizing like, well, if this is the end point, I don't really like that, So yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I feel like it's just kind of talking through it again, not making anybody right or wrong, but just talking more in terms of, does this work or not work for what our long-term goals and what aligns with our values.
No, I would just add that learning the communication styles is really important. And I'm 44 years old right now, and it took me this long to realize that sometimes when I don't know the answer to a question, I just need time to let it sit. And if I'm forced to answer the question immediately, like Kaylee used to do in the conversation, I would make a decision and then I would change my mind, or it would seem like I'm changing my mind later.
Good point.
I wasn't changing my mind. I was just forced to make a decision that I hadn't had a chance to think through.
Or you just blow up because I was like, answer.
No, but these
I
are the type
understand
of
that.
things you have to work through. Yeah. And then, but now you guys probably make better decisions and you're both getting what you want because you can see both perspectives, which is not an easy thing, especially in financial situations. I mean, there's a reason why this is the #1 cause of divorce. So you guys, just a personal question. Do you share, because this is really nice that you guys are sharing this, especially coming as experts. I know people say to Jamie and I, you guys are nuts with some of the stuff you share on the podcast about your arguments and that. But do you guys share some of these stories with your clients, how you guys have had to struggle and what you've had to learn and do this? I'm sure that goes a long way.
I try whenever a conversation is happening with a client and I have something personal, anecdotal to share and be authentic and just genuine about it, I do it. And I think that helps them not only understand that I am a person too, and we also deal with things. We're not just this overarching expert on everything and all knowing, but it also just makes a connection with clients. So that's really important to do.
I can see too, it's like how things can play out in real life. Like what we share is just one anecdote, right? But it just is another angle on a topic or another way to think about it of like, okay, you experience this, that's good to, like I said, one of those inputs that they can just throw in. So I hope it helps with their decision making, just looking at a different angle. And but yeah, I do feel like it does make you a little bit more human.
Yeah, well, I think that's what it is. So it's like, here's a spreadsheet version, here's the theory, here's the technical nature of how to do this. Oh, and here's what we did in real life. Like
Here's the story. Yeah. Here's the
makes a lot of
characters and the real story.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
exactly.
I'd say the #1 thing that has struck me since we've been talking, and sometimes it's big things, sometimes it's small things. We're pretty aligned financially, but something that you said in this podcast that's like really struck me was that being neutral, because money, it can be so incredibly charged. Like I feel like, well, you spent on that and I'm spending on this. Well, I want to put the kids in this school. Well, that's too expensive. You know what I mean? There's so many layers of like how you could get offended talking about money, because money touches every part of our life. It seems like it's our healing, it's our living, it's our, I mean, every single thing. And so I really appreciate, really thinking about taking that financial charge, I guess, if we can call it, because money carries a charge. Money is energy. Essentially, we trade money like it's energy. We make choices based on money, and just taking it to a place of neutral, I think is like a really good, I don't know. That was like an aha for me, even though we usually are pretty neutral, but I'm like, oh,
It's a good
that's good.
reminder.
Like neutralize the money. It
Go
is
deeper with neutral.
it's money is energy and powerful, but what if we just like kind of put it as it's neutral? It's neither good or bad. It's neither here nor there. We're just gonna do it. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Where can people learn more about you guys?
I think the best place to go is the website. We make that an all-inclusive place to tell you all about it. Beyondyourhammock.com talks about who we work with, how we do it, gives a blog and some podcasts so we can get deeper and just hear about some of the things we think about. Anything else there?
Yeah, beyondyourhammock.com is a good place to start. We're at Beyond Finances on Instagram and X, although we don't post there as much anymore. I just had to stop and like, it's not Twitter, it's X. Beyond Finances.
I didn't even know that. Did you know change?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I live
Jamie's under a
apparently.
social media rock for certain things. So.
That's not a bad thing. Yeah, and then Eric's on LinkedIn, so it's a good place to connect. And then if you wanted to request a complimentary consultation from us on a 1-page financial plan, you can do that on the website as well. But the direct URL is beyondyourhammock.com/schedule.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today
Yeah.
and sharing your wisdom and your life lessons.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's good talking.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's great to connect with other
Yeah.
couples.
Us,
Absolutely. Take care.
absolutely.